Because Mark, I wish your name. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Roll call, Mayor Kratzky, I'm present. Moko?
Present.
Groko?
Present.
Kufal, absent. Padilla?
Present.
And Eager.
Here.
Do we have any changes for the agenda tonight?
No changes.
And we need a motion to approve the agenda for Wednesday, August 21st, 2024.
So moved.
We have a motion by Eager. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Padilla. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Comments, updates, concerns? Do we have any citizens that would like to speak tonight? Seeing none, we'll move on to council members. Other updates? Okay, any updates from city staff?
Charlie's gonna come up front.
Okay.
Evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Don't have too much for tonight, just wanted to introduce our new officer that you guys were so gracious to give us about a month ago. This is Officer Ryan Hilsheim. He currently lives in Henderson. He's been working with us for about a month now. And about 8 days he came off probation, so he's out on solo patrol now, out on his own, and he just wanted to come tonight to show you his face and say a few words to you.
Perfect. Again, Ryan Hillsign, super glad to be here in Gaylord community. Thank you for the opportunity. A little bit about myself. Grew up in New Ulm. Was a police officer down in Wyndham. Moved around this neck of the woods for a pretty blonde. And so living in Henderson, and now I am here. So again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
Welcome to Gaylord.
We are happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else?
I have
Thank-
one thing, if I may.
We're gonna do the ordinance right away?
I'm just gonna mention this. We've had a request, this is in reference to our golf carts and all-terrain vehicles. Right now, in our city ordinance, we do not allow them to be driven at night after sunset. I've had a request from a resident that would like to extend that beyond sunset. And so I'm just bringing it up if this would be something that you guys would want to take up a discussion and consideration at a future meeting.
I'm not sure who did that, but I like the idea. Like, for example, most of them that you see them out driving nowadays are like little mini cars, and they have headlights and taillights and turn signals kind of built into them. So to me, it makes sense to authorize the ordinance to allow them to drive at night. If we're going to revisit the ordinance, I just want to make sure that people are making sure that they're getting licensed and that the right ones are on our city streets, and then also that when people are being issued these registrations, that they understand they have to keep them off state highways, because I've seen a lot of them cruising down the state highways and they can't be on those. So I wouldn't be opposed to revisiting that ordinance.
Tony, do you think, I don't have a problem looking at it either. You know, as we get closer to December, you know, by 5:15, it's dark out, you know. But see what other communities are maybe doing too. You know, is it a 10 p.m. thing, is it 11 p.m. thing? I mean, I don't necessarily want my side-by-side going by my house at 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
Maybe it's kind of loud, but,
I can comment on that quick, Chet.
Sure.
I checked with Winthrop and Arlington. Winthrop currently has the same one we do, sunset to sunrise. You know, you can't operate between those hours. During the day you can. Checked with Arlington. Arlington is, you can operate it up until midnight and not before 6 a.m.
and maybe we could look at our noise ordinance, I think at least 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. I mean, maybe we should look at, I don't know if they need to be tied together or not, but some side-by-sides are pretty loud.
Yeah, I know it was brought, this same ordinance was brought up in Glencoe, and they have all night.
They do?
They do.
Okay. I'm not not 100% against anything regarding that, but something to think about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you get a lot of noise complaints about the four-wheelers,
About the ATVs and golf carts and whatnot?
yeah.
0.
All right. Take it up at a future meeting?
Yep.
Yep.
It's fine.
That might change if they're running around at midnight.
Yeah. You will
Yeah.
hear 'em more.
You know,
Well, I see, there's some Corvettes and Camaros running around town that,
That
They're
are
pretty
noisy.
concerned about probably.
Yeah.
Right, there are some loud cards. Okay, sounds like we have consensus, and we'll bring that up at a future meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's nothing else for comments, we will move on to the consent agenda and take a motion to approve it.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Eager, seconded by Moko. Any discussion about our consent agenda? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Communications, requests, and petitions, we just have some information about rate changes with CenterPoint Energy. Moving on to department and committee reports and action items. The first thing we have is Public Works to talk about our baseball dugouts. So I don't know if, is Ty here? Okay. Well, we'll let Steve and the Baseball
Yeah.
Association talk about it. So come on up to the podium if you'd like to.
I'll just do a quick intro while they're coming up. So as you know, we did budget for this particular item for this year, to replace the dugouts on Walsh Field. Everybody also knows that next year we'll be hosting the state amateur baseball tournament. And so this is one of the things that the association was hoping to do in preparation for the tournament. So Bill has done a lot of legwork on this, so I'll turn it over to him at this point.
Okay.
Yeah. You guys have all seen what we have got bids on currently. The only remaining item to add, that we need to add yet, would be the plumbing for the 3 water fountains. Otherwise, this will take care of the dugout project and some of the fence repairs and the new fence in front of the both dugouts.
Okay. Where would the water fountains be? I assume one in each dugout?
Right, currently they're both on the back side of the dugouts. The new dugouts, we're proposing to put them on the inside of the dugout, plus one on the back side of the first base dugout.
Okay.
Because that's where the majority of the fans are that want to access the water fountain.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So tonight we're looking for a motion to approve a quote from CMC Construction Incorporated for $25,800. And that is for the concrete.
Yes, just
Correct.
to do the.
Should we
the
do it
new-
all?
This will be a block, so it'll be just doing that. And then Circle F Farms, CMC's quote does not include the removal of the existing dugouts.
Okay.
So Bill solicited a quote from Circle S Farms for $1,400. And then he also, so he's got two quotes for everything, which is great, except for the fencing, which is under the amount that we have to worry about that.
The fencing we won't find cheaper. This guy does this on nights and weekends. He works a full-time job doing fence work and then on nights and weekends. This is the guy that put all our new fence in prior to the 2009 tournament, same gentleman.
Okay.
So then the dugout roofs would be, again, another item. So Dietz Builders was a low quote on that, $19,755, and then the dugout fencing. Maybe you want to just explain what's going to be done with the fencing, what's proposed?
So along both dugouts, there'll be a 4-foot fence out in front of the dugout that goes along the whole width of the dugout. It's a safety fence. So the new dugouts are 10 by 46 is the block. We're gonna come out 5 more feet with a cement walkway, if you will. And then on the edge of that 5-foot walkway will be this 4-foot tall fence. That's one from the fence guy, and the other one is for just going around and fixing up our fence wherever it needs it, plus adding a bottom rail to both of our fences down each line. And new wire on the first base side.
And the fence around the dugout is really a safety factor. Currently, if you've been there, there is no protection for the players on foul balls coming into the dugout. This fence is, in a sense, a safety factor for that.
fairly common. If you've seen it, been around, you see that a lot.
So the bottom is the approvals that you want, and then the top is just the double bids.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's just kind of lays it out real quick for you. So again, we budgeted 75,000, and what I totaled up here as far as the low bids would be 53,418. And like Bill said, we've got still the fountains coming yet, so, but we should still be under budget.
Sure.
Make one motion approving all four? Is that fine, Mark?
You think that's okay?
I just reference all of them.
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the quote from CMC Construction for $25,800 and the quote from Dietz Builders for $19,755 and also the quote from Valley Fence for $6,463 and the quote from Circle F Farms for $1,400.
So we have a motion from Moko. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Padilla. Any further discussion, or comments, questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. When do you think you'll get the quotes in for the water fountain soon?
I would hope so. I mean,
Okay.
we've been trying.
Well, just come back when you do.
I mean, is that, that's gonna be a couple $1,000?
Couple thousand.
Yeah.
probably, yeah.
Steve,
If they
Steve
get
can,
to do it the way, you know, the common sense way.
I think it's gonna be over 5 to do it the common sense way.
Is that okay?
is it that much? Oh.
Doesn't that water gotta go in before the cement? The water?
Yeah, the water's already at both dugouts, but
Oh.
the existing,
The pipes are already there?
yes.
Oh, okay.
The drain has been the issue, and we worked that out on Monday. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for your efforts, fellas.
Move on to 9C2. We have inflow and infiltration discussion. Do you have any new updates or information
I'm sorry, on
On the
what?
INI,
on the
Oh,
INI?
sorry,
Yeah.
no, Ty doesn't have any updates, so
Okay,
we'll just, like we talked about, keep it on the agenda though.
yep, that sounds great. Okay, next on the agenda is under the city engineer, 9HI, the 2024 street and utility improvement project application for payment number 3. Justin is here to speak with us.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. Before we get into the application for payment, just kind of an update on the project. If you've been out driving around, the project is substantially complete. So they just finished up the seeding today and the striping. So things are done for the most part. This isn't a final payment, but the work really progressed quickly here about the last week, wrapping up things. We are still going to do a full walkthrough on the project with city staff and the contractor and develop a punch list. We already have some things on that punch list. We know there's a few things that still need to get corrected as part of the project, but by and large, the work is done. So it really turned out great. Be happy to answer any questions about it. Otherwise, application for payment number 3. We have reviewed this application for payment, recommending approval. It's $769,164.27 to Nielsen Construction. But I'd be happy to entertain any questions about the project as a whole.
I think we have any.
All right.
Someone want to make a motion?
We'll make that motion.
We have a motion from Padilla. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Groko. Any further discussion or questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yep.
thanks, Justin.
So moving on to new business, we have 11A, ordinance number 367, an ordinance amending section 153.49, allowing billboard signs in the I-2 heavy industrial district.
You'll recall this ordinance, you did look at a draft of this last month, and you did direct the planning commission to move ahead with the public hearing, which they did earlier this month. As a result of that hearing, Dwayne Frederickson was present. Dwayne's been here before as well. And he made a proposal to make a couple changes, and I identified those in my request for action sheet here. But basically, he requested that the setback for the front yard be changed to 10 feet. The original draft that you looked at basically said it fell back to that zone, whatever that zone required, this being the I-2 heavy industrial district. The setback in there currently states 30 feet. So for him to meet that, he would have had to get a variance because of the railroad right-of-way and the setback that we have from that, combination of those two things, he was not going to be able to meet the 30-foot setback from the highway right-of-way. And so after discussion, the planning commission agreed that they would change that particular, specifically that front yard setback to just 10 feet from the highway right-of-way. The second thing was in reference to the distance between billboards. The way we had it drafted before, it just simply said 400 feet between billboards. He brought up that we have one currently on the opposite side of the highway of where he's looking to put it, and he would not have been able to meet that 400 feet. And so after the commission discussed it, and what they came up with was that that would be only subject to that side of the highway. So if you put one up on one side of the highway, they have to be 400 feet apart. And then individually, we would look at the other side of the highway, and same criteria would be required then. So it would not necessarily be looking at it as a whole, you'd look at individual sides of the highway. And so the ordinance has been addressed adjusted accordingly for both of those two items. So those are the only two changes from the draft that you've seen, outside of maybe some clerical things that were brought up during the council review. So those are the only two changes. So the planning commission, again, is recommending approval of this ordinance with those two changes. So I'll open up to any questions. Or if Chad, if you want to chime in on anything there.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing we touched on is if the city keeps expanding to the east down that corridor, down the state highway, you know, then the next one would have to be another 400 feet. You know, and it's just related to that I-2 zone.
Yeah, and that's kind of the big thing here, is we want to make sure that that's clear, that we're only talking about that zoning district, and that's really over by Michael Foods only, that I-2 zone. So there'd be none of the other areas around town that would be subject to this.
There's no other discussion. We are looking for a motion to adopt ordinance number 367, an ordinance amending chapter 153, section 153.49, pertaining to billboard signs as a conditional use in the I-2 heavy industrial district.
I'll make that motion.
Motion from Padilla. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Eker. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
So I'll bring this back next meeting for the second reading then.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you for Dwayne for coming to our meetings and participating in the discussions. Thank you for your comments. Have a safe drive back. 11B, 115 4th Street potential hazardous building, and I'll turn that over to Steve.
We've had this on the agenda in the past. Last year, you recall, in October, we presented a structural engineer's report of that building. Again, you're familiar with it. You've seen the wall that's caved in partially in the back of that building, right over here on 4th Street. And the structural engineer's report at that time basically said it was in poor and failing condition, especially the back addition. Our building inspectors also reviewed the building and has a similar conclusion. And so I've been researching as far as what we need to do as far as moving ahead. We don't own the property. I'm not proposing that we would acquire the property. We also know that there's some contaminated soils from the property immediately to the south that has seeped over to this property too. And so that is also another factor in looking at this property and what to do with it. So when we talked about this last fall, part of that discussion was to declare the building a hazardous building. And Mark at that time had provided a letter to the council, kind of laying out the process as far as what that would entail and how that potentially would work out and what we would need to do. We have talked about this too. The current property owner basically has walked away from the property, according to the bank that holds the mortgage on the property. But also the property owner has been cooperative, meaning that when we did have our structural engineer come out to look at the building, he did sign an agreement that allowed our engineer to go into the building and inspect it. So if the council elects to go down this road with declaring it a hazardous building, that would be a recommendation. We would approach the owner again and see if we could potentially bypass a lot of this process and get them to sign an agreement that would just allow us to go ahead and declare it as such. As far as the contaminated soil, that's kind of one of the things that's taken me a little bit of time to figure out how we're going to be able to work that. My conclusion is going to sound very simple here, but it wasn't simple to get there. Basically, the property to the south is considered the responsible party. They're the ones that created the contaminated soil, so by definition, they're the responsible party. And that's how the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is treating this. They have been working with the current owner for a few years now. I think even the previous owner, too, was involved in this as well at one time. So the PCA has basically made them do some soil borings and other things to determine the level of contamination. Certainly, until you start digging it and getting in there, you're not going to know the true amount. They were required, as part of that, to hire an environmental consultant, which he's done, and that consultant's been involved quite a bit. And actually, from my perspective, it's kind of getting to this point where I'm at, that environmental consultant was probably the most helpful. Versus the folks on the state level, because I probably dealt with 4 or 5 people on the state level, and I didn't really get a true answer as far as what do we need to do? How can what's the process? But anyway, what the consultant basically said is you want to handle this as 2 separate independent projects. The cleanup is one project. If we're going to demolish the building, that's a whole different project. And we don't want to be involved in any way, form, or fashion in the cleanup. That would be on the responsible party's responsibility for doing all that. There will certainly probably be some coordination there as far as, because once we start removing the building, there's contaminated soils underneath this building. They're going to have to be able to go in there and resolve that and basically remove them. So that can all be worked out. We'd have to go through the bidding process, as you can appreciate. One of the big things, too, being it's a commercial building, we would be required to have asbestos testing done. That's a fact. There's no way around that. We'd have to submit a report to the state, the PCA again. That's just a requirement with commercial buildings. Probably the big question for us is the cost. We can get through all this processing, stuff like that, but how are we going to pay for it? Kind of funny or interesting, we've actually had some interested parties of late. Very, very preliminary, but at least they've looked inside the building, and they're still interested in at least researching it to determine the extent as far as the improvements that would need to be done to the building to make it habitable. And so at this point in time, at least those parties are still interested in looking at it, at least going through that process of researching. That kind of opens the door, at least for some state funding, through DEED, Department of Economic Development and Employment. They do have a grant program. It's a matching grant. Not an extensive money. A lot of money is available. They have 2 grant rounds a year, and they have about $2 million per grant round available for the whole state. So the grant scheme is probably not a lot of money, but demolition is one of the qualifying expenses, among other things. So the next grant round, though, is not until February. And then it's about 2 months of their review period before they make any announcement. And it'll probably take another month before you enter a contract. So you're probably into May before you actually, if you're successful, ready for demolition. You cannot do any costs associated with the project. They don't go back and reimburse after the fact, so that's not an option. So we'd have to basically sit on the building for almost another year before it actually would be demoed. In the meantime, hopefully everything would work out with a developer. The city would not have to acquire the property. We would, if we apply for this grant, we would be the applicant, and it'd basically be on us. They do have some criteria for not having to ever pay back the grant that we would have to meet within 5 years. One of them being that we would have to have occupancy, jobs created basically. Probably, there's one rental dwelling unit upstairs that would probably have to be occupied. We'd have to have a business in the door, occupying it with some job creation. Property tax increases, or basically the value of the property would be going up. So I think in some respects, those are the things we'd have to ensure that would happen. Otherwise, we'd be subject to paying back whatever the grant that we received. But they also take into considerations if you, say you meet one of their criteria, like the property tax increase, they would take that into consideration as far as what you might have to pay back on the grant, if you had to do that at all. So that is, I guess I'm just sharing, that is a possibility. The other possibility would be the city just have to pay for it out of its coffers, which would be coming out of our, I would propose out of our capital project fund. At the end of last year, we had a little over $900,000 in that fund. We still have some monies that are going to get transferred out of that for the pavilion project, which are going to be roughly, at this point in time, based on the grant that we received and the donations and the total project cost, we have about $100,000 shortfall there. So we're going to have to transfer that money out of there to pay for that portion of the project. So otherwise, at this point in time, we've always got projects on the horizon that we'd love to have some monies to help spend them down before we bond. And we have equipment replacement schedules too. That ultimately, some of that equipment's going to be coming up. And we'll talk about that during our budget too.
We don't have to commit to anything. I mean, we just keep moving forward. I mean, this has been this has been over a decade. So I mean, waiting another 6 months or whatever,
The only dilemma you might have is that back wall. By it caving in, the building's been compromised. It could become, could be qualified as a safety concern or a problem. We don't know. The building has sat there now over a year like that caved in, I think it was last April, over a year now. So that's the only thing I would bring to your attention is, there might be some safety concern there.
Well, the school had holes in it and windows open and everything else.
So, I mean, so you're saying you don't want us to declare it a hazardous building at this time?
I think we should go down that road, yes. I'm proposing that we do. The only thing that becomes a question is, do we try to go after this grant monies, which, again, the grant round isn't until February, or do we just simply move ahead with demolishing the building now?
Well, I'd rather go after the grant money than having the city pay to demolish that building.
I agree.
Yep.
I mean, the last thing I want to do is have the taxpayer pay to get rid of that building.
Well, it'll still be the taxpayer, it'll be just more of them.
Yeah, different taxpayers.
If one of these parties have been talking to about the building, if they want to do it, they want to get the building and rehab it, they are not interested in the back addition. They would want that to go, which we would want to get rid of anyway, because that's where the contaminated soils are for sure. And that's probably got the most problems. That's where the caved-in wall is and all that.
So if it goes that route, that this, one of these parties wants to redevelop it, remodel it, restore it, whatever, then can we remove it, the hazardous?
Yes, we're still looking at removing that back half, or that addition. So we would still want to declare that a hazard. I think we can continue to move on that, towards that direction. Hopefully in the next month or so, maybe we'll get some indication of how serious they truly are. If this is going to be something they want to take on. As I've shared, the building the inside is down to the studs, and it's a mess. And there's definitely some structural issues that are going to have to be resolved as well.
But if that back building is more affected by the soil, the spill or whatever, wouldn't they have some responsibility in paying for that since it could technically be the reason why it's falling down back there?
I don't know how we're gonna be able to prove that exactly.
Well, if it's,
I know they'll have, they're responsible for the soils, but whether or not that had a bearing on the condition of the building, I don't know. I don't know all the back history of how that property was utilized over the years.
How do they clean that soil? How do they dig all that soil up and clean it without the building like falling down?
The existing, you mean like the brick portion, or?
Yeah, like if that building's caving in, right, and then they gotta dig underneath it.
Yeah, they
you know?
probably have to do some kind of temporary wall there inside. Because the way it is right now, you've got the old brick building, and the back wall of that building has been removed. And so then the new addition, you can walk through there. You can see it literally inside the building where the old wall was.
All right, what are we gonna do?
but didn't we go through, isn't the basement in that old part or in the addition where they still found soil that was?
I think there's probably both, yes. So I'm not sure how they're gonna go in there and dig that all out of there, but I think that's gonna have to be resolved as well. At least I know for sure in the back addition, there's problems there.
Right, and
That's gonna have to be removed.
what was your opinion?
Should've started there.
Huh?
Probably should've started there.
I think, obviously, if we have a wall that's falling down, we need to do something. What's always tricky about these circumstances is figuring out how to pay for it. That's not a super remarkable thing to say. But in my mind, I guess, it's tough to envision a scenario where this process plays out without this building being designated hazardous. So with that in mind, I think it makes a lot of sense to at least get that process started. Hopefully, the property owner is willing to just basically stipulate to the fact the property is hazardous, and we can basically get the whole entire hazardous building process figured out in a single agreement. That's the easiest way to do it. If not, then we kind of have to do like a little mini court hearing before the city council where we put on a small case. The property owner has the ability to show up and present their side of the case, and then the city council is basically the jury, and they vote whether to deem it hazardous or whether, based upon the case, whether they don't think it's hazardous. So, but either way, we don't have any legal authority to do whatever it is the city's role is going to be in this unless we take title to the property or we determine this building hazardous and use those powers. And as far as I'm concerned, as far as Steve's concerned, taking title to this property is totally out of the question. The city, under no circumstances, can we be anywhere near having title to this. So it's really our only option. It's not a great option. It's really tough to get repaid in these circumstances. We'd have the ability to, whatever cost the city incurs, to assess that against the property, but that's really a decision that the council can make down the road on how it wants to approach that, if this is just a sunk cost and investment in the community, or if there's an expectation of being repaid. So my recommendation, aside from all of the issues swirling around the environmental contamination, is might as well start the process of either getting the property owner on board with the hazardous building agreement or starting the process of the hazardous building proceeding, because you do have to give them notice, you do have to give them some due process. So it is a little bit of I'd say it's probably a 2-month-long process to do a hazardous building proceeding.
I agree with all that, but what I'm asking is that back part, the basement has dug up the soil and it was contaminated. Why wouldn't the next door neighbor be responsible, since we know that they were the reason for the spill, for the infection or the contaminated soil?
So, I wouldn't want to just openly opine about other property owners' liabilities in an open meeting. But typically when you're considered a responsible party, liability for contamination does attach. And that extends to properties that are also contaminated, that adjoin the property. For the purposes of this, though, those are the types of costs that are recouped after the fact by subrogating those claims, which is a dopey word of saying that you spend the money first and then you go back after the parties afterwards with your damages. So the city can certainly see how this process plays out and decide after the fact if we have costs which would allow us to be reimbursed by the responsible party adjoining property owner, and then pursue those claims at that point. Some of it you have to really get into the property, get into the testing to figure out the extent and the exact nature of the contamination. Steve, I think, has a little better understanding of the scope and the nature of it. But in terms of where you see cases where you're gonna get some reimbursement, it does usually have to be a pretty clear link between the contamination, the cost being incurred, and the responsible party. So that would be the biggest barrier to the city being able to collect certain fees, is if we aren't able to substantiate that this contamination, whatever it is in the soil that created this contamination, if that was a direct and proximate cause of the walls falling down, and essentially the dangerous condition which required the hazardous building designation. So I'm not saying it's out of the question, but what I am saying is that I think at this point, the city needs to proceed under the assumption that it's gonna be difficult to recover our costs against the property owner and the adjoining property owners. It's not to say it's out of the question, but in terms of the money we're spending on the council level, on behalf of the citizens, I think you have to feel comfortable knowing that, there's some risk that perhaps that money isn't gonna be super easy to recover down the road, just by nature of these circumstances.
I hate to drag this on longer, but, so we don't get that title in the city's name and it stays in this owner's name, and we get this all cleaned up, it's still his building then, right? So then,
Correct.
now he's got a cleaned up building, and he owns it, and he can do whatever he wants with it,
Well, there's still a mortgage on the property,
but it's still his.
and yes. He'd have to obviously come clean, or bring that up to date, plus he's also behind on property taxes. So there would be some back taxes that he'd have to pay off with penalties.
So there's a chance then it would go through the foreclosure, it would go into
Yeah,
foreclosure?
and actually, in some respects, that would be the best thing that would happen from us, because we would be able to assess that cost back onto the property taxes, and if he's willing to pay, then we recoup our monies that way.
I was just wondering, because I think that we tore down that house right behind
The hub.
and I don't know that anything's ever gone there or anything's ever happened with that property, but we paid the bill for the house to go away.
We didn't, well, it went into foreclosure, or tax forfeiture, and last year we brought that up, and I think at that time, you guys decided not to reassess the property, the cost.
I mean, Councilman Padilla is correct that title will stay in this gentleman's name. But in the vast majority of these circumstances, there's a reason why these properties are in really bad condition. It's because the property owner just doesn't have the financial resources to take care of the property, to fix the issues, and the most likely and eventual outcome on these properties is what Steve said. They go into tax forfeiture X amount of years down the road, and whether the city has a big assessment against the property or not, it languishes, and the city has a decision to make when property is being auctioned off because it's been forfeited. Do we want to keep this, or do we want to waive it to incentivize redevelopment? And so I would say I don't have a crystal ball, but if you ask me what the most likely scenario is, it wouldn't be that this property owner, takes the city for a ride and receives this financial windfall of the city fixing this issue. It's more likely that the property goes into tax forfeiture, and for the next 3 to however many years in the future, nothing happens on the property. And it kind of falls into either further disrepair, or if we've demolished the entire building, it just becomes a really tough property to deal with. So these are really tricky problems to deal with. They're expensive, They require some risk, they require some investment, but as far as I'm concerned, and Steve has given this a ton of thought, and we've talked about it at length, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of other options, just to be frank.
Well, and I guess I'm also wondering that if we get a deed grant and we have so long to get somebody to reinvest in that property, if this guy owns it, and it's gonna take 3 to 5 years for the property to go back so that it can be sold again, how does that work? Is that gonna be in compliance with what deed wants?
We would probably, at some point here, well, the tax forfeiture is what's going to kick in eventually. And that's how the property is going to leave this party's hands, the current owner. The bank is not going to take ownership of it. They don't want to be liable for anything more than they already are. We would probably have to work with the prospective developer or buyer of the property. Maybe we would want to enter a development agreement with them. Maybe we'd want to see a purchase agreement with them and with the owner or the bank or both. Something to give us some security that, okay, they're serious, this is going to happen. So we'd probably be looking for something like that within the next 6 months. Try to work towards that endeavor.
This property over here? I thought we tacked on like $5,000 or $8,000 or something.
Maybe it was. There was one of them that you did. Maybe it was the one out there that you didn't. There was 2 of them at the same time, and I might be getting mixed up.
To try to recoup some of our, and this sold, didn't it? I mean,
Yeah, I've actually got potential development plans for that.
So they can buy it even though that guy owns it, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it would be kind of a squirrely deal to orchestrate, but at this point, yes, there conceivably would be a way if the bank would have to cooperate on their mortgage, which is, pear-shaped, and the property owner would have to, I guess, reappear and be willing to play ball. But right now, it does seem like there is potentially a viable sale if everybody can cooperate.
Just what you want your attorney to describe something that's squirrely deal.
Squirrely deal, yeah.
Pear-shaped. Pear-shaped and squirrely, so. Okay, well, it sounds like we can't do anything until we make this consensus to declare it hazardous building. Is that what the council wants to do, or other ideas?
I'm good with that.
Consensus.
I'm good.
Okay, we have consensus.
All right. Mark and I will start working on that then.
Okay. Next on our agenda under new business is 11C, amendment to the library service level agreement. We talked about this at our last meeting with the county present.
Yes, Mark drafted this amendment here. Again, as you recall, council had consented to reducing the service, the financial support from the county next year by the amount that our TDS dues are scheduled to be reduced by. So $4,879.90 is what they're projected to decrease, and so the amendment is basically adjusting their support by that set amount.
So we need a motion to approve the amendment to the library service level agreement.
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion by Groko. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Eker. Any further questions, comments, discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Next on our agenda under 11D, routine maintenance agreement with Sibley County.
So we do maintain 2 state highway or county state aid highways in town here, 10 and 21, and each year we renew this. This is a 1-year annual agreement, so I put in there the dollar amounts. So
we're looking for a motion to approve the routine maintenance agreement with Sibley County for CASA 10 and CASA 21.
you could do them in one motion if you wanted.
So moved.
Motion by Eker. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Padilla. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Any closing comments by council or staff? I'll just say extravaganza, I think went really well this year, so hats off to everyone involved. Other than that, we just need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion from Eker. Do we have a second?
A second.
Second by Lydia. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.